meeting, I thought I would point out there is a handout that you might want to download for this presentation, and it's on the English Online website under the workshop. And we'll talk about this in a little bit as well, and there will be a link that you can follow there, but if you have a minute right now, if you'd like to do that, that would probably help.
Okay, Sabine, you know what, we just started, so just let everybody know that the session is being recorded, and that all the mics are muted, but you can communicate in the chat box, I'm sure as most of you know. And if you would like to get a certificate of participation, you can go to our online forum, and I'll give you the address for that at the end of the session. As well, if there's any technical problems, you can type those in the chat box, and a big blue button, moderator, will be there to help you. Okay, so I want to welcome everybody to this session called Designing CLB Listening Assessments using the CLB 2012. Okay, so first of all, we have two co-presenters today. Rose Elliott started at the Edmonton Mennonite Center for Newcomers as a part-time LINC instructor. She is into her second year as a language services coordinator. And the Edmonton Mennonite Center for Newcomers offer part-time classes, and the demographics for this are benchmark levels 1 to 6, and they tend to go towards families, and they deal a lot with mothers and, of course, new immigrants. Rose is very excited about the new PBLA approach to language learning that's offered in LINC. Okay, and as I said, Sabine Vichopo is the main presenter, but she also asked Rose to participate in her workshop because she did the recording of the audio file that is being used for this presentation today. Sabine is a freelance ESL professional. She teaches, she assesses ESL learners with a variety of assessment tools, and she offers customized workshops to ESL instructors looking for practical hands-on experiences implementing PBLA. Sabine loves helping instructors understand how to create benchmark-level appropriate assessment tasks. I know that's something we could all use, Sabine. And she also recently became a lead teacher at the Edmonton Mennonite Center for Newcomers. So I'm going to pass it over now to Rose, and she will continue the introduction.
Okay, thanks, Blaine. Hope everybody can hear me. At the Mennonite Center, we provide PBLA-related in-service training for our instructors, and we regularly invite Sabine to present. Last fall, she did a 3-session in-service on developing listening assessments for our LINC staff. At the end of her introductory workshop on creating listening assessments, Sabine asked instructors to share samples of audio files to use in the following 2 workshops. So I guess she got excited about my audio files, and she selected one and developed a hands-on workshop for us using this one. I think that it's really important for instructors to have an experience of task-based instruction because I think most of us have only had the experience of the PPP, the Teacher-Fronted Presentation Practice Production Methodology. And so Sabine puts a lot of effort into bringing current research and new techniques and pedagogy into her work. The seminar today is an abbreviated version of the second of the listening assessment workshops, and I think that you will find this presentation very helpful. So fellow colleagues, here's Sabine.
Thank you, Rose, and thank you all for joining the session today. Thanks also to Blaine for introducing me, and to the Realize team. They've done an amazing job putting this conference together. So like Rose said, you're going to see a mini version of the workshop I presented at EMCN. It's usually a hands-on workshop, and we've tried our best to adapt it for this online forum. The references we used are the CLB 2012, the CLB support kit, and Rose's listening sample that she kindly provided for the development of this workshop. And then you'll see a couple of other websites that I'm going to be referring to during this presentation. So we're going to start by setting the context for the task, and then we'll listen to Rose's listening sample and talk about designing benchmark level appropriate texts and questions. And finally, we'll show you one way of providing feedback, and we should have room for questions at the end. Feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We'll try our best to address them right away. If you have a printer available, please print off the question design handout. If you click on the English Online link at the bottom of this page, it will take you straight to the PDF document and a link to TESL provided as a backup, but you'll need to provide your login information to access the handout there. So like I said, Rose was so kind to provide the listening sample for this workshop, and she'll tell you a little bit more about how this came about. But before we move on, I'd like to know where you usually get your listening samples and questions from. Do you have any good resources to recommend? If you could comment in the text box, that would be great. ESL Lab, CBC. Everybody Loves Raymond, YouTube, yeah. ELLO.org. Audio on demand from the college library, podcasts. TED Talk, yeah, that's always a good one. EnglishSpeak.com. NPR, what's that one? Okay, so feel free to keep commenting on the types of resources that you use. Thanks, Christina. Listen, I'm not sure exactly. Breaking News English, that's a good one as well. Oh, National Public Radio, that's right. Okay, great. I'll hand it over to Rose now so she can tell you a little bit more about her listening sample. Rose, I believe you're still muted.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. So I thought that we were going to listen to the original first, but I'll just explain that I have an iPhone, and on the iPhone is an app called Voice Memo, and on Samsung it's called Voice Recorder. Maybe, Sabine, you could slip to that slide if you could. And every smartphone has a Voice Memo app that you can download if it's not a standard feature. So I was teaching part-time in the evenings, and I did not have a lot of time to spend in the resource room looking for audio recordings. And I don't know about other instructors, but sometimes we spend a lot of time browsing the net looking for exactly the right audios for our lessons, and still we don't find anything we really want to use, especially for the lower levels. So I got in the habit whenever I was out of the house of recording audios, for example, at the bank, buying a money order, buying bus tickets, or in this case, returning an item to the store. I would bring my phone out and place it on the counter and say, I'm an English as a second language teacher. I would like to record our dialogue today so that I could use it in my class. All I have to do is press this record button and we would just talk as normal. Would you be okay with that? And I honestly cannot remember anyone refusing. People refuse photos, but audios don't seem to be very threatening. Although sometimes I did have to explain or clarify further. So after recording at home, I would transcribe the dialogue and I would analyze the task in the language. So I got so obsessed with recording that I also created simulations, such as I asked my boss about taking time off, about who to call if I was sick, about the dress code at work. I recorded family members giving compliments to each other. I recorded my sons answering an interview question. Whatever I needed, I recorded. So I was really surprised when I took on the position of language coordinator and discovered that the majority of our staff relied on audio recordings from the internet, or computer programs, or commercial recordings done for textbooks for their listening materials. We know that most of our textbooks are from the States, and while our speech is similar, it may not be exactly the same. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with using these recordings on the internet and others, but I found that my students seemed to really enjoy discovering what Rose had recorded for them each week. Also, I could match my recording to the exact situation that I needed. I would definitely encourage all ESL instructors to try recording your own audio files for use in the classroom for both lessons and assessments. Now Sabine will explain how to develop a quality listening assessment from one of the audio recordings that I made. So it's back to Sabine.
You just want to talk about the context of your listening sample?
Oh, sorry. So as you can see on the slide, the module was shopping and the task was returning an item at a store. Okay.
So what we would like you to do now is listen to the recording. And what you're going to do is you're going to click on this link, and it will take you to a YouTube file that you will be listening to. And before we do this, I'd like everybody to practice raising your hand. And there is a button on the left-hand side where it says Viewers Muted. If you just want to click that and practice that so that we know that you are finished listening to the audio, that would be great. Perfect. So a lot of you have found this button, and if you could unclick it now, so click on it one more time so you can lower your hands. And for anybody who's unable to do this, you can also type in the chat box to let us know that you are finished listening to the audio. And like I said, it's about 3 minutes long. So go ahead and listen to the audio file. So the first thing you want to ask yourself is, which competency area or areas does this listening address? Again, if you could comment in the box, that would be great. Social interaction, getting things done, interacting with others. Getting things done. Okay, a lot of people are saying it's getting things done. All? That's a good question. Okay. So we agree, it's definitely getting things done. The learners need to be able to understand short communication intended to influence or persuade others in familiar everyday situations. And it's also comprehending information, because the learners have to be able to understand short descriptive or narrative communication on topics of personal relevance. Now, some people have suggested social interaction, and what was really neat was when I presented a reading workshop at the TESL Canada conference, I believe it was, Lisa Herrera actually pointed out to me that social interaction is usually used in regards to interacting with people who are familiar, whereas getting things done has to do with interacting with people who are not so familiar with us or with each other. And so that distinction to me was very interesting to note, and I believe it makes sense to think of the two that way. So let's take a look at the features of communication on page 12 of the CLB 2012 to determine whether this listening is appropriate for a CLB level 4. We're going to discuss the ones that are most applicable to this listening sample. And it says here communication should be face-to-face, very briefly on the phone, or via digital media. So I'm just going to move the dot there. And in this case, we're working with digital media. Speech is clear and at a slow to normal rate. And we don't need visual clues. The topic is definitely familiar. People are familiar with the idea of returning an item at a store. Now, what about this? It says here, dialogues are relatively short, up to about 8 turns. And you may ask, well, what is a turn? And the CLB 2012 defines turns as opportunities to speak at some point in a conversation where everything that one speaker says before another speaker begins to speak in an exchange is a turn. And we obviously have more than 8 turns here, according to this definition. Oops. I had transcribed the recording and there were 26 turns, and I'm going to talk about what we can do to address this and follow the guidelines provided in the CLB 2012. But first, let's go back to the features of communication. So language is simple and related to everyday topics and situations. I would say that's definitely the case here. The context is non-demanding, and it's personally relevant. We're going to assume that you've done a needs assessment and your students have indicated that they wanted a module on shopping and that the task they wanted to work on is returning an item at a store. And then the last point helps us to come up with questions. It says that the response to the task doesn't require much speaking or writing. And so that's definitely something you might want to keep in mind when you're developing your questions. So what could we do? We're going to go back to the problem we encountered, which was that we had way too many turns. When I presented this workshop at the TESL conference in October of last year, participants thought they could divide the recording into several chunks, and that is definitely a possibility, although I tend to try and stay true to the full interaction in the, that the people are having. And I want to capture the entire interaction. And one way of going about doing this is to use a program you can download for free, which is called Audacity. I'm sure many of you have used Audacity before, but for those of you who haven't, I will give you a mini tutorial on it. So you can Google Audacity or click on the link indicated on the slide, and Audacity requires WAV files. So if you have an MP4, for example, you need to convert the file, which you can easily do with a website called Zamzar. And we're not going to be clicking on these, but I'll just show you what that looks like. So when you go to Zamzar, you see steps that you can follow on their website, and then the converted file will be sent to your email, and you simply click on it and then download the file. Next, you're going to import this file into Audacity. So first you need to open Audacity, and then you click on File, Open. And I know this is really small right now, but you just, I'm sure everybody knows where that is. So just right here, click on File and then Open. And it'll look like this. And now you can edit your audio and cut out any unwanted parts. You can click the green play button over here to listen to the audio file. And then there's a zoom button over here that you can click to enlarge this right here so that you can highlight anything that you would like to cut using your mouse. And then you simply hit delete or use the scissors. And right now it's really small, so I believe they're right here. And just one note I thought I would make is that what you want to do when you save the file is you don't want to click Save As, which is the intuitive thing to do. But if you do that, it actually saves it as an Audacity file. And if you want to go back to the file later on and make some more changes, then that's exactly where you want to go. But when you're finished, what you want to do is you want to go to File and then Export. And that will save it as a WAV file that you can actually, it's a Windows media file that you can then use to play in your class. And then to figure out what should be included, you want to ask yourself, what do native speakers most often say when performing this real life task? So for this particular task, returning an item at a store, you might decide that that there's a greeting, the customer has a request, they're going to perhaps tell the sales clerk the reason for the request, so why they're returning the item. They're going to show their receipt, get their money back, and then they're going to leave. And so now I would like you to listen to the edited audio file. And again, if you could just click on the hand again, just to lower your hands, that would be great. So when you're finished listening to the audio, if you could raise your hand then, or just type in the comment box to let me know that you're finished, that would be great. I transcribed the recording, and as you can see, there are 8 turns now. The customer says all of these things right here, and so that is considered 1 turn, and then the salesperson speaks here, so that's the next turn. So overall, you have 8 turns now. And you also need to ask yourself if the grammatical structures in this transcript are appropriate for a CLB level 4. So in the CLB 2012, it says the text should be based on the listener's understanding of simple sentences and complex structures, and an initial understanding of some complex sentences and structures. Yes, Desiree says Audacity lets you see where to cut and paste the audio easily. So yes, and you are actually able to move around any parts of speech that you would like as well. So it's really amazing and free. So what I've done is I've created a document that summarizes the features of communication for CLB 1 to 8. And the information is all on one page. It's all from the CLB 2012. But I like creating handouts because I like to make it very easy for people to double check whether the text and the questions they ask their students are appropriate for the respective levels. And this handout is available at the English Online website. We won't need it now, but if you would like to download it later, just you can either just click on the picture and another window with this document will open, or you can also go to the Tutela website, which I indicated at the bottom of this page. Yeah, Sheila just mentioned there's a Wikipedia page for Audacity that she found quite useful. How many times would you recommend the student listen? Thank you for this question. The amount of time really depends on how much scaffolding you have provided your students. So this presentation is meant to be for people who are looking to create assessment tasks that are going to help do a summative assessment. So to figure out if students are able to listen to listen to a task and understand what goes on. So the assumption is that you have done several of these types of listening tasks in your class, and that this is really a summative assessment to determine whether your students have achieved that competency. And I would honestly not give it or let them listen more than twice at this point. I hope that answers your question. And I think just because of the background noise, I would definitely allow your students to listen to it a couple of times, but I don't think more than that would be good for your students, or for you really to come up with an appropriate assessment. So there are a few complex structures in here, but remember, it's meant to be an assessment task. So by now, your students should be familiar with these types of grammatical structures. And they're not overly complex. So if you take a look here, we've got if clauses, we've got some past tenses, which they definitely should be able to understand at CLB level 4. Want to use it in the classroom. So it will just ask, so a couple of modals, right? So it's not overly complex, and it should be manageable for your CLB 4 students. So now what I'd like you to do is create some questions that you would ask your students to figure out whether they've understood the listening. And you can add as many questions as you can think of. If you have 10 questions, it makes it really easy to decide whether your students have passed the test. And that comes from the CLB 2000. And here's a handout that I have created for my workshop participants that just reminds you what types of sample indicators of ability we're going to be looking for. And I find that instructors are really good at creating questions that get at factual details, but they may miss some of the other ones. So implied meaning, main idea, and purpose. And so this type of handout helps me stay focused. And I believe that instructors have also enjoyed having this handout as a resource. Do you think the type of questions asked would change the level of the assessment? Definitely. And that's really what I'm trying to get across. So we're going to take a look at CLB level 4. So this is where I got that from, right? It's not like I'm making this up, but the information comes straight from the CLB 2012, and it tells you right here what should go in your blueprint. Could the questions be asked orally is another question. Definitely. So if you have literacy learners in your class who are unable to answer questions, or who are unable to perhaps read the questions and then answer in writing, I always encourage instructors to do oral assessments, because really all you're trying to do is figure out whether your learners have understood the listening, and there's nowhere that says that you need, there's nobody that says that you absolutely have to ask questions in writing. And so definitely I would encourage instructors to allow or accommodate students who need to be accommodated. I hope that answers your question as well. So back to this handout here. If you didn't have a chance to print it off at the beginning, that's all right. Rose is going to type the indicators of ability in the chat box here, so that all you need is a blank piece of paper so that you can brainstorm some questions. And I will show you the transcript again so that you can take a look at this. And I'll give you 5 minutes to come up with questions. So read the questions again. So the questions, so it's identify, you want to create questions that get at identifying purpose, main ideas, factual details, and some implied meanings. I'll give you 5 minutes to create some questions, and again, I'll move it back to the slide that has the transcript on it so that you're able to brainstorm some questions. Yeah, and they could definitely be true or false questions, but what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to encourage participants to come up with the actual questions that you may want to ask. Yeah, and if you just want to brainstorm on a piece of paper for now, and then we'll come back and we will collect your questions one by one, and we'll go over identifies main ideas, and we'll collect some, or we'll encourage participants to provide questions at the end so that they're a little bit more organized that way. Okay, I think we're ready to keep going here. So identify as purpose. Let's hear from you. Let's see if we can keep them nice and organized so we have some that just get at identifying purpose. What's the store policy for returning an item? I would think that's more of a factual detail question. Would you agree? Does the customer want to buy something? Yeah, definitely. That would be a good question to figure out the purpose. What did the customer want? What is happening in this recording? Very broad and general. Very good. Yeah, these are all great suggestions. So here is one that I came up with. What does the customer want? Which is exactly what you just said. So why is the customer talking to the saleswoman? She wants to return a speaker. So it could be a multiple choice question. Yeah, why was she at the customer service counter? Very good question as well. Where does she write her signature? I believe would again be a little bit narrower, right? So it would be more of a factual detail question. So let's talk about identifying main ideas. What did you come up with there? What does the customer do for a living? Why did the customer come to the store? Is she happy with the item? Is she happy with the item? Yeah, I suppose. She's returning it, so she's not happy. I thought this may also be a question that gets at implied meaning, but she's obviously returning it, so I see your point. Why did this person go to the store? What did she buy? Why is she returning the speakers? What's the reason the customer returned the item? How did she pay for it? Okay, great. I think we're ready to move on. So here are some ideas that I had. So what's wrong with the product? Rose said the volume doesn't work or it's not loud enough. Where are the people? So those would be definitely main ideas. How about factual details? We've already heard a few. What are some other ones that you have come up with? Did she purchase the item with A, debit, B, credit card, C, cash? Yeah, very good question. How much does the store have to return? So how much did she pay? I believe is getting at the same idea. Who is swiping the card? Ooh. Yeah, that's also a really good question. How much money does she get back? How much can she spend on a new speaker without owing extra money? Yeah. I wonder if that one is good for a CLB level 4, just in terms of the way the question is worded, maybe a little bit complicated for a CLB level 4, just in terms of the grammar that's being used. How much did she pay for the item? Yeah, and I think we're getting more and more ideas. So when did the customer buy the item? She said, I bought it last night. So I tried not to give it away by saying yesterday. So how many days did she have to return the item? How much did the product cost, including the GST? This was actually something somebody brought up at a presentation that at a presentation where I presented this workshop. And people said, well, the item didn't cost $41.99. That was including the GST. So I thought I would include that in this question here. And then how did the customer pay for the item? Now we've got one more left, which is identify some implied meaning. Very good. Where does this conversation take place? Can she get a refund without a credit card? That's a really good question. I've never even thought of that one. Was the customer happy at the end? Maybe a question to do with the store return policy. Why is she able to return it? Yeah, very good. What kind of store is this? Do you think the customer will find another item to buy? What is the woman's job? Does the customer have experience returning items? Was the customer satisfied? Was the clerk friendly, helpful? Very, very good questions that get at implied meanings. What is she using a pen for? Was the service rep pleasant? These are all excellent questions. Thank you. So here are some of the ones that I came up with. You could also ask true and false questions. So the woman is likely going to buy a similar product or item, true or false. What is the customer's job? That was one that you already got as well. Was the customer able to return the product easily? So here we've got 10 questions. And again, if your students have been able to answer 7 of these 10 questions, it means that they, in theory, have completed or have been able to demonstrate that they are able to talk about this particular competency area, which was getting things done, which is what I chose to assess. So let's talk about feedback a little bit. How would you provide feedback to your students about their performance? If you could type in the chat box, that would be excellent. Okay, and we have a great question from Sheila. She would like to know if I would allow the students to see the 10 questions during their listening. I always think that test strategies are something that we need to teach our students. And so providing the questions, I don't think there's anything wrong with providing the questions during the listening assessment. And have students take a look at them prior to the assessment. Somebody says, I might create an MP3. That just moved up really quickly here. That I could put into their digital portfolio with verbal feedback. Yeah, great. Written criteria checklist. I usually have my students do a self-assessment to note in which area they had difficulty, factual details, main ideas, implied meanings. Excellent. So that is exactly what I was hoping to hear, and this is something that I do as well. And just as a reminder, the Centre for Canadian Language Benchmarks, and especially the people who are helping us implement PBLA, are saying that feedback should be action-oriented, so it should include information that helps students improve. And they also say that research has demonstrated that self-reflection results in quicker progress. So you might want to ask your students, which questions did you get correct? Put a check mark in the column next to the questions you answered correctly, and it might look like something like this, where you have the questions on the left-hand side. You tell students exactly what you were trying to get at with this, and they have an opportunity to decide whether they have difficulties with any one of these indicators of ability. And I'll just show you the other part of this as well. Okay, and there's a few more comments. I'll just read them. Give feedback about different areas or types of questions that they did well on, types of questions they had difficulty with. Yeah, definitely. My problem is always with students who got all the details but missed the main idea. So that's a good point. And so then that gives you great information as well, because then you know that your students have difficulties coming up with the main idea when they listen. And so it's an excellent opportunity to take and teach them how to determine the main idea of a listening. Darla asks a question, and she asks, if there are 10 questions, how many from each type? Purpose, main idea, factual, detail, inference. That's a very good question, and something that has come up in workshops done by Joanne Pettis in the past. And what she has said is that you might want to consider weighting the items. And so obviously factual detail questions are much easier than inference questions. And so it really depends on the type of task that you're doing with your students. Not all tasks lend themselves to asking all types of questions either. And I can't really give you a hard and fast rule with regards to how many you should be asking. But the reason I'm doing this workshop is because I really want to encourage teachers to make sure that they do address all of the different indicators of ability, because that is in the end going to determine whether your students have accomplished that competency area. I hope that answers your question. So Rita is saying, during formative assessments, I show the questions for them to focus their attention and identify all the details while listening. Yeah, and again, I would agree with that, because we often listen for a purpose, right? When we're out in the real world, we listen specifically for information that we want to know more about, and so to keep the questions from them until they've listened to the listening sample, I don't think is real world. Your questions are in order of lower to higher order. Yes. That's a very good point as well. And I believe that the CLB 2012 is an incredible document that actually does this job for you. So if we go back to this slide here where it talks about, or we're basically just looking at one competency area. Actually, sorry, I'll be able to move here a little faster. So let's say, for example, this one, right? If we take a look at comprehending information, it tells you exactly what you need to get at. So gets the gist, identifies factual details, some implied meanings, keywords, and expressions, identifies who, what, where, and when. If you get at all of these, higher level thinking is already included, because starting at CLB level 4, students can understand some implied meaning. And so as you move up the levels, these get more complicated, right? And so the CLB document has done an incredible job figuring this out for teachers. And so we don't really need to worry about that so much. Although I do really like Bloom's taxonomy, and the workshop will be coming up that I am. And I'm thinking this is probably the workshop that I am going to be presenting in TESL Canada, because it's something that's been on my mind for a while, and I I would like to address this very question. So thank you again for bringing this up. Rita says, during the reflection, I asked the areas they feel they had enough knowledge, context and vocabulary, and experience having performed such tasks in real life. Yeah, so asking about background knowledge is definitely something, and that's to do with teaching really and providing the scaffolding that your learners need in order to accomplish that task, and it's definitely something to consider when you're teaching. And I'm just going to go back to our original slides here. So what else do we have? Yeah, taxonomically speaking, definitely. So Bloom's taxonomy, if you Google Bloom, so B-L-O-O-M, you'll be able to find Bloom's taxonomy online, and you can learn a little bit more about higher order thinking questions. There's also a resource, it's by Vacca and Vacca, V-A-C-C-A, and they have created a book, and it's called Content Area Learning. Vacca and Vacca. And that one also talks about higher order thinking questions, and it's one that the PBLA leads are taking into consideration when they're doing their CLB classes. What about how many true and false fill in the blanks and sentence answers? So there are, that's also, yeah, it's a very good question. So what you want to make sure you do is that you create questions that aren't super obvious. So there are ways to do that. And again, we would have to do an entirely new workshop in order to address this question. But some questions are easier than others, right? So true and false questions, we know are very easy because, first of all, students have an opportunity to get the question right simply by guessing. So you don't want to do too many of those. But again, if you get at the implied meaning questions, and you make sure that you have a couple of those in there, and then some of your other questions don't include information that comes straight from the text, but information that students have to think about a little bit, that also helps to make sure that students aren't being asked questions that are super or way too easy for them to pass the test. There's another question. Do you find that ordering them taxonomically is confusing for learners if the information doesn't appear in order? The CLB document actually tells you if the questions should appear in order. So in the document, it'll say when the text is, and I believe starting at CLB level 6, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe at CLB level 6, they start saying that questions may be presented out of order. And so that's something to watch for. So again, if that is part of the CLB level that you are teaching, then you definitely want to present questions out of order. But if it's lower than that, so below 6, then you want to make sure that you're following the guidelines presented in the CLB 2012. And I hope that answers your question there. Can you address self-assessment more? How exactly do you do that? What does your action-oriented feedback look like? So I believe by having a document like this, students are self-assessing what they were able to do. And we've got the question, and we show students exactly what it is that we're trying to get at, which is identifies purpose. And so if we ask our students to simply put a check mark here saying, yes, I have been able to answer this question correctly, or maybe an X for no, I wasn't able to answer this question. This is a good indicator of which particular types of questions students have difficulties with. And then action-oriented feedback. So feedback where you simply say, great job, is not action-oriented, but feedback that tells students, you did a great job doing this, right? So in this case, perhaps the person was able to answer the first question here. So you might say, you are really good at identifying the purpose. However, you still have difficulties when it comes to questions that get at implied meaning. So that would be action-oriented feedback, where the student knows exactly what it is that they have difficulties with. And you might also include a resource that helps your students improve in that area. Learner self-assessment, the CLB companion guide, what I know, what I have experienced doing, and how confident I feel about doing this. Yeah, and this is something that I often use when I do needs assessments with my students. So I always ask my students, okay, so these are the topics that I would like to do with you, or these are the topics that I think would apply, or that you may be interested in. Why don't you tell me what you already know about this? What you have experience doing, and how confident you feel about doing this. Rose, I'm not sure. Are you still there? Do you want to jump in and join the conversation? How much time do we have left, Blaine? Are there any more questions that I have missed?
Yeah, I think this has been a very thorough explanation of how to turn a listening audio file into an assessment.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. So I guess I could speak just a minute or so on I actually use my phone, and I just plugged in standalone speakers for the classroom. So, if you're in a setting where you don't have a lot of technology, but you have a smartphone and a set of speakers, you have enough technology.
There was another question. Do you use the same procedure to create reading assessments? Yes, the exact same procedure for your receptive skills, and different procedure for my productive skills. So you always want to make sure that whatever indicators of ability are in the CLB document for the respective CLB levels you teach, that you address those. Thank you so much for your wonderful comments. I really appreciate that you came and joined the session.
Yeah, and I wanted to thank you, Sabine, for a great presentation. You can see by the amount of the questions, by the comments, that 95 people showed up, and 95 people thoroughly enjoyed it.